That I chose is kind of a picture of the project, the transition to parenthood in same-sex and different-sex couples, a theoretically informed multi-method approach. And the research that I will present, the work I will present is joint work with Ylva Moberg and Maaike van der Vleuten, who are post in my project. And the paper we have is called The Child Penalty in Female Same-Sex and Different-Sex Couples in Denmark, Finland, Norway, and Sweden. I have a paper that is joint work with Alison Gertz, who is a PhD student. So she's the main contributor to this paper, who's called Who Carries the Baby? How Lesbian Couples in the Netherlands Assign Birth Motherhood. And this is revised and resubmitted to a journal. And then I will say something about a paper with Madeleine Evertsson, who is also a PhD student, called Taking Turns, Lesbian Couples Decisions of First Birth Mother in Sweden. And here is the team from the people I presented. We have Evertsson Mercado here in the middle, who has started as a postdoc recently at Utrecht University. At Utrecht, we also have Eva Jaspers, whom you see in the back in the picture here. And we have Silke Eisenbrei, whom we were trying to figure out comparison with the US as well, but for the moment it doesn't seem to happen because they don't have data that can be we knew that it would be a problem with longitudinal data for the US, but we were hoping we could do some cross-sectional analysis, but for the moment it seems really difficult to find a comparative topic that works for all three countries, Sweden, Netherlands, and the US. Acknowledge the funding, which Anna already mentioned here from the ERC. We're grateful for that. And some additional references, I'll come back to that later. So the first paper that I would like to talk about is The Child Penalty in Female Same-Sex and Different-Sex Couples in Denmark, Finland, Norway, and Sweden. We have presented it in some conferences. I don't know if maybe some of you have listened to this before. If so, I apologize. So the motivation for this study is that the child penalty is a main determinant of the gender pay gap. Evidence from a wide range of countries has documented the increasing within couple income gap during the transition to parenthood. Relationships experience a reduction in income while men do not, or to a much lesser extent. A lot of research has been devoted to this, but the underlying causes are still somewhat of a puzzle, and it's difficult to discriminate among theories when focusing on different sex couples, as men on average have higher income than women. Men cannot, as a rule, carry and give birth to a child. So there are kind of links there that are difficult to disentangle. Another motivation for this research is that there is little research on female same-sex couples transition to parenthood, and especially longitudinal research on this topic. So our aim here is to estimate models where we kind of superficially hold gender constant, kind of. We want to vary who is the non-birth giving partner in the relationship. So we estimate the child penalties in female same-sex couples and different-sex couples up to 5 years after first birth in these countries. And the theories that we focus on here, where we want to test theories on the gender transition to parenthood, such as specialization, doing gender and identity formation. So very briefly, specialization theory states that the gendered work different sex couples may be a result of family utility maximization and the expected gains of within couple specialization in paid work versus care. But the unequal division of work and care could also be linked to the social construction of gender, where women and men either are seen as confirming and doing gender by performing more of stereotypically gendered chores, or by default comply with discursive rules and requirements linked to the heterosexual matrix, as suggested by Judith Butler. Identity theory or identity formation states that the gender division of work and care could be spurred by motherhood, and these identities are shaped by norms suggesting that mothers, but not fathers, should prioritize the child and care instead of paid work. And expectations regarding the child's need of its birth mother and of her prioritizing the child, they are specifically strong during the infant period, and they're linked to breastfeeding norms and ideals. So this would mean that the mother who carries and gives birth to the child in same-sex couples would perhaps identify more strongly with this primary carer identity that is also linked to motherhood, and that might create a difference between the two mothers, the one not carrying the child and the mother carrying the so in other words, the perceived importance of prioritizing the child as part of the motherhood identity, at least in this initial phase, may be more prominent for birth mothers than for non-birth mothers. And please feel free to interrupt me and ask questions along the way if anything is unclear. So we try to test these theories then in a family-friendly context where fathers' parental leaves are facilitated. So we think that any patterns we find here where fathers are encouraged to take leave and do take leave to some extent should be found elsewhere as well, and perhaps even more strongly so.
Sorry, one question. In Sweden, in same-sex couples, are both mothers eligible for a parental leave after the child is born? Yes.
So in Sweden, they've been eligible for parental leave since 1995, even before they were recognized as parents. In Sweden, in particular, parental leave comes with being, if they're married to the birth mother. So a person married to the birth mother can take leave. In the other countries, it's a bit later. Maybe I should show you a slide linked to this.
But my question is, in your setup, regardless of same pair, both partners are eligible for the parental leave, right? That's what I wanted to clarify.
Exactly. I mean, so they are, but here you see at the bottom of this table, you see that it varies, right? Mm-hmm. So Sweden has had it for the entire period we focus on the period from 2002 and on. But in the other countries, it kind of shows up later. But if anything, that should contribute to bigger differences in parental leave uptake, right? That the same-sex parents should be less motivated to share the leave than the different sex parents, so to speak. So, but this is completely correct that it varies among the countries.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks for good to clarify that. Okay, so this kind of, when we think now about these theories and what we would expect when we look at the income development in these countries, if we think about specialization, if specialization is the most important factor here or theory describing this. Then in the extreme case, we would find complete overlap between father's income development and social mother's income development. So both couples would specialize, both couple types would specialize, and the birth mothers in different sex couples and same-sex couples, their would overlap because they would take the parental leave, etc.
I'm sorry, Marie, can you repeat what is the x-axis and the y-axis?
Oh, I'm sorry. So the x-axis, it's the 0 is the birth year, -2. This is just a stylized graph. So this is just fake to show you what it's about, and then it's just a random numbers for income. Not random, but I mean it's kind of they don't make sense. Maybe in a Swedish context, perhaps. Thank you. Yes, good. If we think about gender, the gender or the social construction of gender, we expect the birth mothers or the mothers in the same-sex couples to both act as we expect fathers to, as usual, more or less, kind of continue earning money, and the birth mothers to take the longest parental leave, but we expect that gender will contribute to a bigger income gap here in the different sex couples compared to the same sex couples where also the social mothers will take leave, but probably a bit later than the mothers who carries the child due to breastfeeding mainly. And for the third, for identity formation, we would expect that here instead, like the birth mothers curves would completely overlap because they would identify with being the primary carer the most, be the early period after the birth. So they would take, and we partly know that they do from a paper I have with Katarina Boye in 2018 in ESR. They do not completely overlap, but birth mothers take more parental leave in both types of couples. So, but according to the stylized assumption here would be that they overlap and that the social mothers take some leave, whereas the fathers does not, basically. Their identity is the fatherhood identity, kind of that's strong for them. So to repeat it in words, and please let me know this might be confusing, these assumptions, but so the hypotheses are that the child penalties for fathers and social mothers should be the same. Zero penalties for birth mothers should be the same, according to specialization theory. And the social construction of gender will contribute to a bigger income gap in different sex couples compared to same-sex couples after couples transition to parenthood. And thirdly, birth mothers in different sex couples and same-sex couples have the largest and similar child penalties, followed by social mothers in same-sex couples. Fathers experience the smallest or no penalty if identity formation is the most important here. So the data, we use longitudinal population register data for these countries, and we focus on couples in which one person has carried the first child. Sex is identified in the rest are aged 20 to 55. We have partners with non-zero earnings the year before birth. We focus on the period 2002 and on, and we study the couples, or we follow the couples from 3 years before to 5 years after the birth. And this is mainly due to the fact that we have few same-sex couples. So if we go further in time, they kind of keep decreasing, so to speak, and we have very unsecure estimates in the end.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
How are couples defined? Like, how do you know that they're couples from the registry data?
So they are either married, or if they have kids, we can identify them when they're cohabiting as well. Yeah, that was the shorter answer, I think.
One other question for me, if you allow. Do you have any transgender people in this register data set, or do you like hold the gender constant? Because in this gender identity, it can also matter, right?
Exactly. So they cannot change over the period we focus on them. The thing is, in most of the data sets, they could have changed at some point, but we will only see their gender. We only have like one file with gender, right? So we might have some, I'm sorry, transgender people in there, but they should be few. Yeah, get some water. So the dependent variable is labor income, or the child penalty that we focus on here. So this figure shows the number of female same-sex couples transitioning to parenthood in these countries in each year from 2002 and on. And you see, I mean, you see on the y-axis here, it's not a huge number of people. It's an increase in most countries. In Sweden, it's clearly an increase. In 2003, a child could kind of legally for the first time have two parents of the same sex, and that contributed to a more increase in the development for this country, whereas here it's a bit slower. So linked to this, if you want to dig into, I mean, if you have an interest in same-sex couples and their rights, etc., please have a look at a chapter I have with Eva Jaspers and Ylva Moberg in the Handbook of Family Policy. I will show that in the reference list to some other publications again in the end. Here you see some descriptive statistics for the countries in focus. As you probably know, the Nordic countries belong to the social democratic welfare regime cluster. They're known for familialization. And as part of these defamilializing features, parents have access to generous job-protected care leaves of about a year or more in all countries. And the reimbursement levels vary between 70 and 100% of earlier earnings up to a cap. So this contributes to high maternal employment rates, as well as overall high levels of labor force participation among women. So around 76% in Denmark, Finland and Norway, and 81% in Sweden. In addition, childcare is subsidized. Average monthly fees are low in an international perspective and guaranteed to children from an early age. And Denmark is the country with the largest share of children less than 3 years old in licensed care, as you see here, 72%. And in Sweden and Norway, about half of all children less than 3 years of age are in licensed childcare, compared to 33% and close to the European average in Finland. And you also see some about the parental leave length there. So we do have, I mean, we do have some differences here, right, between the different sex couples and the same sex couples, and there might be selection issues going on here. So to try to mitigate selection bias into these two couple types, we use curse and exact matching to try to make sure that we have a group of different sex couples that are as similar as possible to couples. So we match the couples on pre-parenthood characteristics separately in each country using parents' age, the first child's birth year, and parents' earnings before entering parenthood. So both parents' ages and both parents' earnings before parenthood. And then we use an event study approach to estimate changes in labor earnings associated with entering parenthood, which is the event here then. And if assumptions hold, an event study captures the effect of the first child's arrival on changes in the parent's earning in the years after the first child's birth. And our model estimates estimates period effects of labor earnings each year before and after the years. And the year before the first child's birth is used as a reference year. And we only focus on the first child. So we will not kind of continue or look at other children, but they can actually show up in the graph. But for the moment, they're not included in they're not controlled for, right? All event time indicators are indirectly interacted separately with each partner type, and the model includes indicators for level of education, as well as for calendar year and age dummies, all interacted with gender. So here you see the number of cases we have in the sample. The number of different sex couples varies from close to 220,000 in Norway to 400 in Sweden, and we have 461 same-sex couples in Finland, up to 1,084 in Sweden. And this is the full sample before the matching, and of course the matching changes this, as you will see. So this is the full sample, all couples, descriptive, nothing controlled for, and the figure shows the annual labor earnings in thousands of euro per year on the y-axis in each country, from 5 years before the birth of the first child until 5 years after in this slide. We can see here that the within couple income gap in the years preceding, during, and after the birth of the first child in different sex couples and in same-sex couples in all the countries. And part of the differences between, if we look at the between country differences, could be due to differences in family policies and the ways in which maternity, paternity, and parental leave insurances are designed. We also have home care allowance in Finland that is really important. We also have it in Norway, and it seems to be used less in Norway compared to Finland. We see a substantial initial drop in earnings for birth mothers in different sex and same-sex couples, and that, of course, most likely reflect that they take the lion's share of the parental leave in all countries. And in Norway and Sweden, we also see a small decline in earnings for fathers the year after, and this is most likely because they use parental leave. That parental leave use among fathers is more common in these two countries. So here we have the matched sample. You can see where we end up now for each country. We managed, of course, to keep a lot of the same-sex couples, whereas the different sex couples are considerably reduced. And the fact that you see these income trajectories in the period up until before the year before birth, they're very similar. So that suggests to us that the matching is successful. We now have different sex couples where the woman and the man have very similar for the same-sex couples. Then we go on to show the event study, the estimated individual level child penalties for the matched sample. And here the y-axis indicates the percentage difference between the observed earnings and the imputed earnings in the absence of children. So the fact that the earnings trajectories are different for each partner after childbirth, even when there are virtually no difference in earnings pre-parenthood, suggests that specialization has little to contribute when it comes to explaining differences in individual child penalties. Birth mothers in different sex couples experience healthier than birth mothers in same-sex couples. And in addition, social mothers experience a larger decline than fathers in earnings in all 4 countries. And again, we see this dip in Norway and Sweden for the fathers' income trajectories, but it seems to be kind of a temporary dip that they quickly kind of compensate for again, or they continue on a similar route from year 2 and on. So the overall pattern is a very clear child penalty for birth mothers in all countries, a notable but small child penalty for social mothers, and a very small, if any, penalty for fathers in the first year of childbirth. So this suggests that they contribute to explaining part of the larger income gap in different sex compared to same-sex couples. Okay, maybe I should say something more about also the fact that you see here that that the birth mothers have a fairly similar development, fairly similar child penalty. We believe that this is an indication of the relevance of identity formation. They're not super dissimilar, right? The birth mothers in the two couple types. We could also, if we want to say something about the differences between countries, look at Finland, where the same-sex couples actually have a remaining penalty gap, or how I should say it, income gap in the years after the first year as well. So this suggests that specialization is used more in Finland as we think about it, or it's more beneficial, or we know that we saw that they had fewer share of children in childcare. We also looked a bit at gender attitudes, and Finland is on average a bit more, how should I say, conservative than the other countries. So this is kind of an interesting thing that we would like to explore more, what causes these differences. So very briefly, the graphs presented so far has shown the estimated individual penalties, and here we show the within couple child penalties. So figure 5 shows the percentage by which the earnings of the birth mother fall behind the other parent's earnings, so the percentage change in the income gap in each year. So depending on the country, the within couple income penalty increases by 50% or more for the birth mothers in different sex couples in the child's birth year and the year after, where Denmark is the exception, where the penalty is smaller. And for birth mothers in same-sex couples, the within couple child penalty is smaller than for mothers in different sex couples in the year after the birth in all countries but Denmark. And in the long run, the child penalties are reduced much more for birth mothers in same-sex compared to different sex couples. And the long-term child penalties in different sex couples that we see are most likely partly due to gender differences in part-time work, as few women in the Nordic countries drop out of paid work altogether after childbirth. But as I said earlier, they can also have like a second child here, and these are every couple who had a first child, so some of them will have a second child, no doubt. Okay, so to wrap up, so the inclusion of same-sex couples, or wrap up this first part, I should speed up now. The inclusion of same-sex couples in the study has two purposes. First, it enables a critical test of theories formulated to describe the gender division of work and care. And it also shifts the focus to a growing but still often overlooked group of parents in longitudinal studies, the division of same-sex parents. So whereas specialization theory would lead us to expect that the child penalties should be similar for birth mothers in both types of couples and for social mothers and for fathers, the social construction of gender would predict that within couple child penalties will be larger instead, and that will increase the difference in different sex couples compared to same-sex couples. Identity formation also predicts that all mothers in same-sex and different sex couples will experience a child penalty larger for birth mothers than for social mothers due to these internalized norms linked to being to the child's need of its birth mother. So the conclusion linked to the hypothesis: specialization receives little support. The social construction of gender and motherhood, fatherhood, norms and ideals gain support, and identity formation gain support. And as we saw, some hypotheses may gain more support in some countries than in others. And overall, the child penalties experienced by mothers in different sex couples are considerable 5 years after the first birth. So if you, limitations I should also mention. We have a small number of female same-sex couples. That means that we cannot follow them for very long by sex. So we call them same-sex. They are same-sex couples, but they might not identify as lesbian couples, for instance. For them, we are about to kind of look also at the birth of a second child, but it kind of is getting complicated because the other mother can carry the child. So we need to kind of figure out how to measure that in a good way. And other factors may matter here as well, to some extent, sector, industry, or occupation. If you have any questions.
Can I have a question?
Yeah.
Thank you. So I have a question with regard to the slide that you showed before the conclusions, the results. So yes, so this one, thank you. So my question is, so there was almost no difference in income prior to birth?
So that is because we have the matched sample. So there,
Yes.
Yeah.
And do you account somehow for the difference in earnings between partners prior to birth? Because my idea is that in case of the different sex marriages, it's usually a woman who earns less, and then she becomes a mother, and again, she earns even less. But I wonder whether there is some sort of selection with regard in the same sex couples, that the partner who earns less would become a mother.
Not really, or they earn very similar amounts. And together with Katarina Boya, I have the study on Sweden published in Journal of Marriage and Family last year, I think, or this year, where we look at this also kind of longitudinally. And we don't see, I mean, we see that couples who have kids, they on average have higher income than same-sex couples who doesn't have kids. But when we look at who becomes the birth mother, there's basically no difference. And that is partly because they have so similar income, so it doesn't really matter. And as we will see with the qualitative interviews, it's not something that kind of comes up in their reasoning.
Thank you.
More questions? Otherwise, you are free to interrupt, or Anna, yeah.
No, I just wanted to say thank you for like very interesting presentation, and exactly to invite the discussion.
Yeah, I will continue a bit if it's okay with the qualitative studies, if we have time.
Yes, we have time. So I think it's very interesting. So you can tell us a bit.
Thank you. So I will try to go through this a bit quickly then. And I'm exaggerating a bit here now because we have interviews with couples expecting a baby in the Netherlands and in Sweden. And now I'm kind of exaggerating the differences a bit. So the Dutch paper is with Alice and Gertz. It's called Who Carries the Baby? How Lesbian Couples in the Netherlands Assign Birth Motherhood. And the reason why I put this picture up is it's not very typical for the Dutch couples, but she kind of started this paper with a quote that I will read to you now. So yeah, we talked about it a lot and did not talk about it a lot. Well, because emotions ran too high, because you could not talk about it anymore, because both of us wanted it so much. You cannot keep having that conversation, but in the end, you have to make a choice because you want to start a family. In our relationship, this has been the hardest decision to make. So that it really is, for some, it really is a tough, decision arriving at who will carry the child. And common is that it's more common that both want to carry than neither wants to carry, for instance. Right, and there disappeared. Yeah, okay, that shouldn't be there. Okay. So the motivation, again, partly the same as for the quantitative studies, kind of trying to get a firmer understanding of the theories. And here we kind of also want to show or ask, how do couples in which both partners can carry the child determine who will actually carry it? Is it like financial factors that matter the most now when we have these couples? Very quickly, theoretical approaches, sociology of personal life we lean on, and maternalism and queering motherhood by Park. I can say some more about these later. The data, we have semi-structured interviews with 21 Dutch lesbian couples expecting a baby. Both partners were interviewed separately. It's a non-random sample, so no generalizability. And instead we try to, our interest lies in context-bound knowledge, aiming for what has been described as theory carried generalization, referring to Smalling here. So the themes that are brought up in this paper, and that partly is similar in the paper with Evertsson on Swedish couples, is the meaning attached to birth motherhood. What does it mean to be a birth mother? This can be separated into the embodied experience of pregnancy, into biogenetic imaginaries, and birth motherhood as recognized motherhood. Now I have no control over my notes anymore. So if we think about this with the embodied experience of pregnancy, for many this is linked to something that one wants to experience. It's kind of it's linked to femininity, but if you are comfortable with that, for many it is something that you want to see happening in life at some point. Here are some examples of how it could link to socially rewarded femininity. One person says, I always found it beautiful to see people that were pregnant. I also thought it was very special. I also want to feel special. And another person saying, it's just not head think fits me. And for some, this is very easy. One person says, pregnancy is something I always dreaded. So I was actually very happy that she wanted to be pregnant. But it's not super common that it is that easy, so to speak. The biogenetic imaginaries, we have couples who talk about, the joy of seeing a mini-me, a little copy of myself, more or less. And this also links to the monomaternalist norm, which Park writes about. How should I say? Kids are expected to have one mother. You can have a foster mother or the biological, etc. But there is this norm about the mother being irreplaceable. You can have stepmothers, bonus mothers, etc. But there is a special link assumed to biological motherhood. And this link also kind of is a result of what people think or expect and might happen when they kind of become pregnant, carry and give birth. There's something about like a maternal instinct that are kind of kicked out, or not kicked out, but I mean, it kind of starts, it gets put on, it starts kind of, I don't know how to express that. I hope you understand.
I will ask a question for clarification. So the woman who is carrying the child, is the oocyte also of this woman, or it can be also of the other woman? I mean, because it can be like that, so I don't know how it is understood in this study.
So in most cases, they carry their own egg.
Okay.
We have one couple that doesn't in the Netherlands. In Sweden, should be possible theoretically now as well, but I don't know if it has happened yet, so to speak.
Okay, so it's not common.
It's not common, no, exactly.
Sorry, I have one other question, if I may, about this maternal instinct. Because I fully understand why you mentioned this, because is it that you expect this effect to moderate the decision, whether which mother actually bears the child? Or because I'm not even sure if this maternal instinct is proven to exist. So
exactly. No, I completely agree. And but it's the expectation that there will be such a
so you
effect.
assume that people think that it exists, and that if they don't bear the child, they won't bond with the child, something like that, right?
Exactly. So we have examples of persons who say, you know, my partner really wanted a kid, interested. Given that we're now having a kid, I thought it would be better if I carry it, because then this maternal instinct will kick in and I will bond with the child.
I understand.
So that's a very common, I agree with you that I mean, and the fun thing was that actually my Madeline, who is doing the interviews in Sweden, the first couple she interviewed, now the biological mother has much harder to connect to the child than the social mother in this case. So again, I mean, there's variation, of course, and it's nothing natural or happens to everyone, etc.
May I also have a question at that point? Because I'm wondering, I'm very curious whether you have in your sample any couple in which both females are expecting at the same time.
No, we don't, not in the first round of interview. So we're coming back to them. I forgot to say that the thing is that we go back to them and interview them again now. So we have started in Sweden to do that. And they, I mean, a few have already had a second child. Some are expecting a second child. So there are various, we want to see how their plans kind of worked out. So there is also a focus of how will you share the parental leave, etc., so that we can kind of do longitudinally what we're doing for the quantitative studies as well, qualitative, for the qualitative and quantitative studies. Another thing that is important is birth motherhood as recognized motherhood. And this, of course, again, links to this monomaternalist norm. A person says, if I would carry the first child, then I will feel like a mother and everyone will mother. And we hear evidence of these feelings of invisibility, not being acknowledged at birthing courses for the social mother, or friends congratulating the birth mother to be, but kind of forget to congratulate the non-birth mother who is not pregnant. And this is the couple that I told you about, where the pregnant mother is carrying the egg of the other mother. So we were talking about it not too long ago, about who is actually the co-mother. We cannot figure it out. So then I think we reached our goal, that the lines of one mother are blurred. So this is very clearly this, I mean, couples who have experienced this monomaternalist norm and managed to challenge it. I will not say too much about this, how they choose birth mother. Well, maybe a bit about desire and longing, but that comes in the second part, I think. Very quickly, many presented their views on birth motherhood as personal, but narratives echoed of cultural discourses on femininity and womanhood. And informants struggle with and both reinforce and resist this monomaternalist ideal. And age can be used by both partners to arrive at a decision, but it can also be a very powerful tool employed by one partner to block further negotiations. One informant says, at some point she threw age into the ring, and it was like a boxing ring, and she threw age in there, and that solved it, because then the other mother, who perhaps argue for it anymore because she was younger. Now I will try to be more brief. And again, this is kind of the quantitative part of this, is the publication we have in JMF, where we look at, quantitatively who becomes the birth mother, but this is the qualitative part. And now I'm kind of, again, exaggerating, because now we see two women who agree, but this is partly kind of the discourse that we kind of read into these couples. I mean, I don't think they agree much more than the Dutch couples do, and the Dutch couples agree to a large extent as well. But the Swedish couples are more concerned about sounding, at least, as if they are they agree on these things and kind of have solved this well. So theoretical approach, so much about this, but I think it's kind of inherent in the Nordic or Swedish, or how we think about ourselves. Egalitarianism is important. They've invested a lot in making fathers use more parental leave, etc. Now we have two women having kids together. Of course, they want to be as equal as possible, and they can be because they don't have a man in the equation. So this is very important with the imagined sameness, reference to Gullestad. And other factors that come up is essentialism, embodiment, monomaternalism, and queering motherhood. Similar approach. Here we have 20 Swedish lesbian couples expecting a baby, and the partners were interviewed separately. So here we kind of thought about it more like they're taking turns being equal. Most of them plan for having a second child, and that solves part of the difference, right? That I will go first, you will go second. We will both experience the pregnancy. We will both have biological kids, but the genetic part is not really talked about too much. And the other one is then trying to find difference, because you have to still decide who will carry the first child. So kind of maneuvering between this, wanting to be equal and finding something that solves makes the decision. So the quote here, observing it from so close, but also having that experience together with Jenny, that's like the main thing that I would like to go through, that she would also experience what that's also something really special. So this is a mother being pregnant, but we also have examples of non-birth giving mothers who maybe didn't have plans to become birth mothers, but then when they kind of observe it from the side, some of them change and also want to carry a baby. And again, that would be cool to, experience the same thing as my partner does later on. And here we have some, exactly the maternal instinct quote that I mentioned earlier, the second quote here, but also a way of being equal. This first quote here, my work is my life. And I thought, if she starts, I will just keep going. I will keep working and just go with it. And then it feels as if I now get another focus, or that I dare to switch focus from work. So this is a couple where the work committed mother was the one carrying, because that was a way for them to create equality, that they would both, she would not just continue pursue her work and kind of move on, but she would now be much more involved and engaged than if the other person would have carried. Finding difference, desire and longing is important. If someone is wanting to carry a child for a long time, that plays into it. And this is the strongest quote I think we have of this, where this person actually says that my ovaries were making drum solos. Of course, they cannot do drum solos, but that was how she expected. It was very biological, and that's so cool. I want to experience this. I have had an intense yearning that I obviously have possessed. Like, how is it possible that the uterus, and then we don't hear what she says, but the fact that you kind of you dress your desire in such strong words that your entire body is saying, I need to carry a baby now, kind of. But that's not always the case, that it's put in these strong words. So conclusions for the Swedish couples. Most couples plan to have 2 kids and take turns being birth mothers. That was similar in the Netherlands, but perhaps not as much as in Sweden. This will enable equality in an inherently unequal situation. The importance of genetics were toned down quite considerably. And this, again, I think is an indication of this. It would be an unmendable difference, so we don't talk about that one will be genetically related to, or we don't say that it's important in any way or so. And the shared and embodied experience of pregnancy was highlighted together with equality in parenting, like with the work committed mother here who actually was the one carrying the baby. So overall conclusions and limitations for qualitative studies, factors linked to financially rational decision-making, which we kind of think about in the quantitative studies, they matter little for who carries the child, if at all. The couples interviewed, the limitation here, they are higher educated and on average have higher earning than couples who do not decide to have children. So they can also afford not to pay too much attention to income, for instance. That's know how it would look if we would have a more spread sample. Thank you. And here are some additional references again.